Listen, like the border wall, I tell you something. USA is not necessarily an ethnic state. So they don't really mind under other ethnicities. Neither of the parties, they don't, like even the Republican Party, as much as people like to say that they care about ethnicity and, a specific race of some sort, like there will never be like any, like they don't care as well. So what they do is they just restrict a little bit more the entrance, and they just want to have a safer America. That's what they want to have. They don't want to have like this. It's not like a public park that you can just go in and out. No, it's a fucking country. You need to protect it. Make sure that nobody who's gonna do some harm or drug smugglers or stuff like that will go.
Well, I mean, the majority of drugs come in through ports of entry, so a border wall wouldn't help that. And also, illegal immigrants can commit like 50% less crimes than your average American, so it's not like they're increasing crime.
Actually, here I disagree with you a little bit.
On what?
Just like, obviously does not improve the crime rate. Like, it could slightly increase the crime.
It doesn't increase the crime. There is some study done over, I think, a 30-year period that showed that it didn't impact the crime rate. Like, it didn't increase it or decrease it. And then the one that was done in Texas, which we have, like, pretty good statistics on illegals just because it's, like, we're right at the border and we keep track a lot, said that they had, like, a 50% less incarceration rate. But they definitely don't increase the crime rate. And I would argue that they're good because they provide economic value and labor to the country, and they're able to fill jobs and stuff like that.
Yeah, because you pay them an assload to fucking pick apples upstate New York. Like,
well, sure, but those are like we need more workers within the United States. There's like a 1.6 million job gap that they're able to.
You guys
fill.
have enough population as it is. Why do you feel like you need more people coming in? I mean, nothing bad about it, but just saying, is it really that necessary?
It's not. I mean, yeah, there are.
Be able to go through a process to be able to get in. They will need to go through a little process, and since USA is not an ethno state, and it's just like a civic nationalist state, it's not a country that it's like cultural ethno nationalism. It's like civic nationalism and stuff like that, because common language and common political ideology, and that's what they all share.
Well,
the country share.
I'd agree that we should make our immigration easier, but the main point I would make is that just stopping illegal immigrants costs more than it benefits us, because there's an actual economic benefit to them coming in. Meanwhile, building a wall and trying to stop them from coming in has economic costs.
Right. Sure, maybe the government will be able to profit, and like the very CEOs, sure. But think about the general population, multiculturalism in general does not work. There's always conflicts between one group and another. And it's not just about race. It's about even different religions or different cultures in general. Like, a Chinese person may hate what a white European person does sometimes.
I mean, multiculturalism works pretty well in the United States, especially when it's made us one of the most powerful countries in the world as far as wealth and economics go.
I tell you why it sort of works. I won't say it works as it should, because there is still separation of groups that are only getting bigger and bigger. And there's always like people like, obviously there's always gonna be, but in the USA it's somehow like bigger because it's more diverse, so therefore you're gonna have like, let's just say the BLM and the KKK and stuff like that, right? These groups are favoring one race towards the other.
Well, I think the Black Lives Matter, I think, is the first one you said. I think they're just advocating to try to get more equal treatment, whereas the KKK is actually advocating for segregation stuff. The BLM's not advocating for any type of ethno-state or any type of separation.
Yeah, and that's why they hate on white people, and they claim that all white people are racists. Okay.
I'm pretty sure they just want less police brutality and different policies like that.
Listen. They're getting treated equally already. Even before they made the organization, even like under Bush, under Obama, you know, they were already like pretty much, you know, equal to the white men. There's no denying that. Maybe the police brutality happens not because he's solely black, but maybe it's because he just resists too much, you know, maybe stuff like that.
Well,
you
no,
know,
there's
not because of the color of the same person.
There's been, like, you can look at studies, for example, with, like, nonviolent possession of drugs, and those types of arrests are disproportionately occurring within African American communities, even though they have those possessions at the same level as white communities. Or you can look at sentencing guidelines where for equal crimes, Black African Americans in America will be sentenced at a much higher rate. So, like, there is definitely areas within the justice system where, like, equalizing for things, you can see there's discrimination.
Okay. Where?
So sentencing laws was one of the ones I brought up, where, like, for the same crime, African Americans will get a higher sentence than whites on average. Or, for example, with charges on marijuana possession or, like, nonviolent drug offenses, even though studies have shown that white communities do those drugs just as much as African American communities have a much higher rate of incarceration for them.
Are you sure they're doing the same amount?
Yeah. That's been, like, shown that, like, a white community is just as likely to have, like, marijuana and weed as an African American community, and, like, equalizing for those factors is what the studies do before they decide that there's, like, a disproportionate amount of arrests.
You see, I remember even when I was a kid, I heard, you know, about the police brutality, even though I'm not even living in the USA, but my country is, like, you know, a really good ally. So we hear from you a lot. We hear from the country a lot. So how can that thing about black people getting, you know, I don't say that they did, I don't say it never happened. Obviously, it used to happen. Obviously, like in the 20th century, it used to happen more. The black people were just getting basically sort of unequal treatment by the authority. But after it got talked so much, do you really think that it will be even common anymore at the very least? Because it's not really that common as it used to be. And if it does happen, it's actually kind of rare to pretty rare. I mean, unless if it's in, like, you know...
I mean, I think...
Unless it's in a very secluded place, you know? Most of the states and most of the cities don't even have that anymore.
Well, I mean, it was only till fairly recently that they had stop and frisk within New York City, and I think we still see these cases of police brutality happening where, like, there's some, like, clear bias occurring, if it, like, conscious or subconscious. And I think the sentencing disparities kind of show that like,
maybe they just resist more. Maybe they just resist more. If you're gonna resist in front of a police officer more, he's gonna be more aggressive towards you.
Well, so the evidence I point toward that there might be a racial bias behind it is the fact that they're being arrested more for the same crimes that are committed at the same rates in both communities, and that they're sentenced longer for those same crimes. So, like, at pretty much every level of the justice system, there is disproportionate discrimination occurring, and so that's why, like, BLM would be acting or would be advocating for trying to fix these guidelines and make things more equal, while the KKK is just advocating for, like, racist policies that have no basis but to divide people and make more conflict.
Sure, because I've seen some videos of BLM people and they seem pretty, like, not aiming for equality more, but more aiming towards, like, blacks like they're aiming for the same thing, just switch it around 180 degrees. It's like, well, I think their ultimate goal is to make so that the blacks will get treated better than the whites. And you know, if they were actually aiming for equality, I will not be hearing you know, that stuff. You know, now if you even dare to support the Republican Party in you know, like in front of a Democrat, you know, especially a Hispanic or an African, right? Then they will do something to you. You know, maybe you know, they're getting, as I said before, they could probably get more time in jail. They will do probably more time in jail because they resist the authority severely without any justification, any reason. And if they were not resisting all the time like they always do, maybe they will get a lesser sentence. You don't screw around with the authority.
Right, but so what I'm saying is that they're not screwing around with the authority to any higher degree than whites are. That's what like the studies show, because they normalize and say like for the same charge, like for like just like a general possession charge, they will be sentenced higher. So you'd have to show that like somehow they are like resisting at a disproportionate rate. You just can't take that as anecdote. And also, I don't know where you're getting this idea that the BLM mission statement is to like create like them at a higher level of equality or somehow be privileged, because if you just go to their mission statement on their website, it says that they just don't want to be systematically targeted for demise and that they want to be recognized for African American contributions to society. So like it's more of just like a...
The African Americans in the United States of America are already getting recognized as contributing people by many.
And don't you think that's largely don't you think that's largely because of civil rights movements?
You see, around the time that there were the civil rights movement and stuff like that, obviously blacks got discriminated more. I'm talking about nowadays. Nowadays, it's not really happening. These people just take the smallest things, they nitpick, and what they do is they basically say, you see, that it's still happening. It's not happening. Look. You have before Trump, you had an African-American president. You had Barack Obama. He was a president of the United States. Okay. That's quite an accomplishment if you're asking me.
So
you know?
No, it is. It is
like
definitely.
Comedians and stuff like that.
Well, so I just pulled up the study that I was referencing before. It's from the U.S. Sentencing Commission, and they found that black men are sentenced to 20% longer prison sentences for the same crime as white men. So like. There you have one example of systematic oppression that a movement like BLM would be working to correct.
How do they know? How can we know for sure that he got more time in jail? Maybe they did the same crime, sure. But you gotta think what happened before they went there. Maybe he did something, you know? And I'm not saying it's because of race. I think it's because of the economic situation. You know?
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that.
People who come from poor neighborhoods are more prone to commit crimes. They're more likely to commit crimes like robbery, you know, drug dealing, you know, crime of that sort for profit.
Yeah, no, I recognize that, which is why I'm saying, like, in the studies I look at, like, the same crime, so, like, two people go up to the judge with, like, the same kind of crime on their record, and it's just saying that, like, even after, so this is, like, after they've been convicted of the crime, right? So they've been found guilty by the jury. The judge will sentence the African-American to a 20% longer prison time than the white counterpart. So it's, like, after the point that they've been charged with the crime.
Right. What states specifically? Do you know what states it's more common to happen? You know, like, let's just say if it's in the deep south.
I want to say that it's just across the entire United States, but I mean, like, it might be more prevalent. Like, you might be right that there might be more like racist sentiments within the deep south than in the north. But I think the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which this was done through, is for the nationwide.
I think these you know, if there was any cases that happen like that, it's probably, you know, like I would say the Deep South, you know, they always, it was always like sort of like had a very big African American, you know, community. Because, you know, first of all, because of the slavery, but then, you know, the slavery was abolished, and from there they just started to get more rights as time went on. And nowadays, I think they maybe coexist with each other. They have been with each other for so much time. I think it's pretty common to see a white person from Alabama having black friends at this point. And, you know, it's really weird because Alabama and Mississippi, they're like one of the most conservative states, if not the most conservative, and yet they have the, you know, the highest amount of African Americans, you know.
Yeah, but so,
usually people will think that they will vote Democrat. But no, look at states like Alabama and Mississippi, they all vote Republican.
well, I think that's probably because like the cities are where the African American concentration is, and then those are gerrymandered to the point where they're not really able to vote like in the senatorial race for who they would want to represent them. But I think like the mayors of those cities are usually African American. But I'm not even sure. But when we're also like, would you agree though that the judge sentencing people to 20% longer is an example of racial discrimination?
No, I still not convinced.
What about so the other thing I was referencing is from the Drug Policy Alliance, and they said that Black and Latino people use and sold drugs at a similar rate to those of other racial groups, but they are far more likely to be arrested and prosecuted, and that racial disparity doesn't even change after it's legalized. So if they're like doing it at the same rate as other communities, but they're arrested much more, wouldn't you agree that that shows there's some kind of like a systemic racism?
I don't know, I feel like that nowadays Jews are being more discriminated than you know, African Americans and Hispanics.
How are
I tell you why. I tell you why, because there have been like a few attacks on probably cemeteries and synagogues and the graffitis in some of the even the democratic states. You have you know, graffiti here and there. You'll see you know, with anti-Semitic saying or anti-Zionist, which is equally as bad because
didn't Dylan Roof shoot up an African American church in one of like the
no,
largest...
yeah, but that happens way less.
Well, I know like
Americans getting killed because of racism happens way less.
I know like recently in Louisiana,
with Jews it happened twice in this decade. In this decade, with blacks it only happened one time. With Jews it happened already twice, I think.
I know in like just recently, within a 10-day period, 3 black churches were burned in Louisiana.
Ooh. Well, yeah, that's Louisiana. Let's see how much many crime against USA.
But regardless, wouldn't like the hate crimes for any community be a bad thing?
No, obviously.
Yeah,
Not
but
saying
so
it's a good thing.
right, but so like there are
I'm
like
just saying what's more common.
right, but so you'd agree there are like legitimate reasons for BLM to advocate for like better treatment of African Americans in the United States.
If it was in the I'm sorry about that. If it was in the mid 20th century, I would think it will have a more reasonable, like, you know, it will be more reasonable.
But I think there's
If
always
it was
like
in the mid-20s.
I mean, it was definitely worse in the mid-20s, but I think there's always good progress that can be made, especially with these sentencing disparities and like criminalization and just like all the stuff that we can end up like trying to fix. And then even going further than that, just advocating for like more investment into these impoverished areas so that they're able to like get out of poverty and be able to become more better like contributing members and have lower crime rates and stuff like that, right? Because you agreed that like economics was the main reason behind there being a higher crime rate within those communities.
Yeah, obviously, economic. Always when you have like a poor area, obviously there's gonna be more drug dealing, more theft. You know, more mafia, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need a tape for that. Like I put like a piece of paper on my webcam. I'm afraid of spying. I don't know why. It's like they just say if you download something, it kind of has a thing, you know. Maybe even Discord stalks you. I don't know, something like that. That's why I always put a piece of paper on my webcam because I also use it as my mic, and I need a tape because now I have my window open and my door open, which boosts the air more, so it kind of, you know, makes the piece of paper get off the camera.
I gotcha, but so like I just think, just really quickly getting back to the idea, and then we can go off. You would agree though, like if the studies that I listed are true, at least that there is like a valid reason to try to correct those things at the very least, right? Like assuming that
If
the
it's
studies
actually,
are true.
listen, if it's actually like if it is really ready to very common, then sure, they have a point.
Do you want me to? Is there a place I can drop the links to the things I was citing?
Yeah. So you can send it.
Okay, here. Yeah, there's the three things that I referenced.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to run real fast, but it was good talking to you, and maybe we'll be able to talk again.
Alright,
You can
see
see
ya.
the links. Alright, see ya.